Hi. The following content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. If you are a healthcare provider, please consult with your affiliated institution or local ethics committee for ethical guidance related to clinical practice.
Hello, Bioengineering 131. Welcome to Module 34. This is the fourth on genetic engineering. David, take it away.
Thanks. We just wanted to talk a little with you briefly about gene drives and especially their application when you think about them in relation to their use to eliminate diseases that are carried by mosquitoes. There's not huge literature, but a decent sized literature about the ethics of this activity. And so we just wanted to summarize a little bit of that literature for you. Obviously, there are significant benefits of this, right? Reduce or eliminate terrible diseases. The four primary diseases that I'm aware of where people are trying to eliminate different species of mosquitoes to achieve are dengue fever, malaria, yellow fever, and plague. And again, there are different species that carry those, so there's specific mosquito species that would be targeted by gene drives, which you learned about in the technical briefings. So we've seen benefits. What about the risks? And I'm hoping to illustrate, again, how to think ethically about these things. So we'll start with this.
I just want to say one thing, especially for malaria, this is a huge benefit. I mean, I want to, because we listed these, but malaria, I believe, is the #1 killer, mostly because of its activity in Africa and a little bit in South America and other places. And I believe millions of deaths per year.
Yeah, dengue fever, though, yeah, all of these are big killers.
I just want to say that I want to just asterisk that these benefits are not small, and so you can't just put them.
Although I will say one thing that's frustrating is we actually have treatments for most of these diseases that we don't have in those contexts.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those are the diseases. So potentially millions of people being saved and spared from being horribly ill or dying. So what about the risks? So there's a number of environmental concerns. The impact of the loss of mosquito larvae as a food source for some species, the impact of the loss of mosquitoes as a direct food source for birds, and also, and interestingly, some species of mosquitoes gather together in large swarms, and those swarms actually impact the behavior of megafauna. So, for example, there are elk that their migration patterns are determined by where these large mosquito swarms are. And so there's worry that there may be unintended consequences, not just to the birds that eat them or the frogs or fish that eat the larvae, but also that you may impact the behavior of larger organisms that are impacted by mosquitoes and these large things. So if you're a utilitarian, you would weigh one of these sets of things against the other, and figure out, can you mitigate some of those risks? Are there ways, are there other species that would play the same role that mosquitoes play in the niche that they occupy so that the environmental impact is lessened? You figure out whatever you can do to mitigate the risks as best you can, figure out what you can do to maximize the benefits, and then weigh them to decide whether or not they're justified in going forward. And thinking of this as a research activity, it might vary a little bit depending on the type of field trials, right? For some field trials, they're more contained and so their risks would be lower, whereas from other trials where you have more of an open field trial, the risks might be greater, as well as the downstream risks of the actual implementation of the technology in practice. Because these are right now at the stage where these are all being done as research trials, right? Now, what about non-utilitarian considerations? So we already talked earlier about the idea of playing God. Obviously, wiping out an entire species is seen by many critics as a prime example of playing God. Is this an example of hubris, and could there be unintended consequences? One of the things that I didn't really emphasize probably enough in the discussion of the playing God objections, in our work, one of the things that we found in our working with people from different religious traditions is that it's wrong to think that any religious tradition says that you can't ever manipulate nature and the world. In fact, all the religious traditions argued that you should actually change the world to make things better for humans. Really, what it really is about some kind of notion of balance. There has to be a balance between, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the obligation to tend the garden and to preserve the garden. So we're given these gifts, and we also have duties to make them better. And they have to be in balance. And so the question really is not, should we interfere in the natural course of things? Of course we should, and we do. Otherwise, life would be nasty, brutish, and short, as Hobbes would say. But the question really is, how far should we go? What's the right balance between being too instrumental in the way you look at the natural world, too far, too instrumental in thinking about it in entirely instrumental terms, versus having a more balanced view of things where we are going to manipulate the world, make it better, but not think of things strictly in nothing but instrumental terms. So does wiping out a species cross the boundary to be unbalanced? Is there an intrinsic value to species? Those are all non-utilitarian kinds of considerations. There are other non-consequential or non-utilitarian considerations as well, particularly for open field trials. Do you need, what kind of community, oops.
Sorry.
No problem. What kind of community engagement do you need to have take place and authorization in order to be able to do open field trials? Because when people are doing these field trials, they're happening among a bunch of people who are in the world in which, experimental versions of mosquitoes are being introduced. Do people have a right to have a say about it? So community engagement, is that required, and what kind of community engagement and authorization? And I will say we have pretty good regulatory system for informed consent, which I'll talk about in a minute. We don't for the notion of community authorization. And I'll come back to talk about that again more in a little bit. And then there actually might be explicit informed consent. Is that even possible? So if you're releasing these mosquitoes, do you need to get informed consent from every person in the area where you're releasing them? David Resnick argued that you do have to have informed consent from everybody. And if anybody objects and you can't release them into that community, well, then that makes the research almost impossible to carry out. But there also will be more specific consents, because the chances are this research is going to require things from individuals like blood tests, surveys, home locations may be used, and where they were released and where your home is may actually become identifiable information. So there's actually more traditional research that requires consent that will likely be part of the kinds of efforts for some individuals. But this issue, going back to the issue of the other issues, transparency, stakeholder engagement, this could be even broader than just the community where field trials are released. Who are we going to reach out to? And then ultimately issues around governance and decision-making and who decides. And we saw that that issue of control was a big part of the playing God concern, was really about worries that people have about scientists and corporations becoming new priesthoods that have all this control in very undemocratic fashions. So how is this going to happen? What would it look like to really have community engagement and authorization? In Key Haven, Florida, where they were doing open field trials, they actually had a referendum, a ballot referendum, to decide whether it was going to go forward with majority rules. But again, you have to decide, is it just a simple majority? Does it have to be a supermajority? How many people is it appropriate to get buy-in from? There's also an approach called deliberative democracy, in which you get groups of representative people in that community. You maybe have 10 or you maybe a bunch of them. Then you educate them about the issues so that they're pretty educated. Let them deliberate over several days that they're educated and thinking about this issue. And then as a group, decide what they think the community ought to do about it. And if you have several of these engagement processes, deliberative engagement processes, if they all say the same thing, like, yes, it's okay for our community, and we think, having been educated, we think it's okay, then that gives you license to go forward. And we've seen deliberative democracy as an important value in trying to think about these things. So this raises a whole range of very interesting, important issues around who makes the decisions, what's the governance, as well as whether it's appropriate just generally to intentionally wipe out species, even though there could be some ecological harm, tremendous benefits from doing this. And just remember, this could be happening in a community near where you are right now. That's it for this video.
This could happen near you soon. So it's not a purely theoretical conversation.
No, there are open field trials taking place right now in communities around the world.
And of course, we don't have malaria in the United States. And so there's, as you point out, there's a whole different issue about who gets to decide and who are the doers and who are so it's a good one. Well, this ends our module. Thank you very much.